Welcome back, everybody. Take a break. Stephen Shamus. Take a break with Stephen.
What's up, Alex? Good to see you today.
Hello.
There was a manhole explosion, 2 of them on my street today. Smoke, all sorts of fire trucks, engines. You can still smell. You go outside. When that thing blows, that smell of smoke, oh my God, it fills the air. It fills your lungs very quickly. I went right back inside. I'm going to go out later again when the sky is clear.
Yes.
Ever happened in your neighborhood, Alex?
No, not in Queens. No, Queens is very quiet.
Well, the manhole covers, they could go at any time.
They can, but I think that's more of a Manhattan than a outer boroughs problem. It happens more in Manhattan.
I'm giving you my skeptical eye right now.
Look it up. We got to do a pie chart of manhole explosions and where.
Manhole explosions? Okay. Well, Alex, I know we have a very special guest today. His name is Aaron Meyers, a very well-known collector.
Yes.
So Aaron will join us, and we are going to talk all things comics. He has a little bit of a different take on things, which is why we like to bring different point of views. We are not one-sided like some of the news sources that you might be familiar with. All right. So we'll wait till Aaron joins us here, and we will get started right away. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We have a special guest, Aaron Meyers, a super collector, and we always like to bring on different points of view, different people from different areas, and talk about their collections. It's always fun to do that stuff. Aaron, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, Aaron, we know you're in Oregon. How are things going over there? You keeping up your collecting during the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I am. It's definitely changed in the last 6 months or so because you just don't have the same sort of conventions or comic swaps or flea markets really anymore. All the places that I would definitely, especially through the summer into the fall, would have been buying up a lot of stuff at this time. So it's changed, but still kind of steady. It's interesting how just society and collecting society both ramped up and slowed down in different areas.
Yeah.
Right.
We
People
that.
Yeah, we've noticed that the market's on fire. By the way, love the background. Is there any particular piece that's hanging on the wall that has a special sort of significance to you, either memory-wise, financial-wise? Like, is there something like, that piece, that was the first thing, that thing went up 100? Is there anything in the background there or hanging on the wall that's special?
I mean, all of these have, not to turn away from it, but all of them have kind of a special story behind them. I don't know. I've got different. I kind of rotate my art too. I don't have a ton, but as much as you can afford, I've got maybe 150, original pages, stuff like that. So I try to rotate them out a little bit. I've got another wall in front of me here that you can't see. This is my office and workroom. The actual comic book room is in a different part of the house.
I think I speak for Alex when I say we would love to work in that environment with all the boxes. Listen, we've all worked in comic shops. I worked in a comic shop for many, many years. Alex worked in a comic shop for many, many years. That's what it looks like, right?
Sure,
Alex,
right.
It looks like you got the boxes piled up. So Aaron, why don't you give the audience a very brief description of how long you've been collecting, what kind of stuff you collect, and how you got on the radar of a lot of these creators on Twitter and stuff where you're going back and forth with them.
That's a good question. I would say, I've been seriously collecting again for about 10 years. I got back into it. It's kind of an interesting story, I suppose. I had stopped collecting mid to late 90s, like a lot of people are, my age, in their 40s, got burnt out. Collectible card games kind of took over the market, stopped collecting, comics, and switched to Magic the Gathering. Same old story, probably heard a bunch. So I hadn't really I dropped off comics almost completely for about 10, 11 years at that point. The iPad came out, and we had just had given birth to our first son. And so it's a lot of quiet, dark nights, and I've got this iPad I can read on. What can I read on? Looked up what are the best comic books, whatever it was, 2010 at that point. And it was Walking Dead and Fables and a few other things, and downloaded some digital copies of it. I actually pirated all of them and put them on the iPad just to, both testing the functionality and reading it. And it was you start reading and I'm like, holy crap, what's happened to comics in the last 10 years since I dropped out of them? Things have completely changed. Almost immediately after that, I went to the comic book store in town, which I hadn't visited, bought up all the back stock of all that stuff I had been reading, got everything signed up for, opened a box and started reading that. And then at the same time, like Twitter was being used. It wasn't nearly the same thing it is now. It was a lot smaller, and you could follow people and talk to them in a much easier way than I would say is accessible at this point. So comic creators were on there. People were sharing their love of comics. I found out all the, it's like you could, it was really a community at that point where you could just talk to people about what are you enjoying, what are you liking, and what's something I need to catch up on in the last 10, 15 stuff I missed in the 80s and 90s when I was a little kid that I wasn't reading. And just kind of start diving deep into it from there. With the reading comes the collecting aspect of it. It was almost like it wasn't intentional to really build like a collection for value, which I think is still kind of the best approach when it comes to collecting. It's like buy the stuff you love for whatever reason you love it, and the rest kind of comes from there. And so the learning more the intricacies of the collectible market when it came to comics was a secondary outcome of getting back into reading and enjoying them.
I think you hit on one thing there that I think, not to take away from the collectibles and the collecting comics, because that's what we're all about, but the scared mentality of digital readers don't buy comics, or digital is going to kill the print. But you said exactly, you started digital, you weren't buying comics at all, and then it made you go into a shop. I think that's a lot of people, a lot of guys are scared that digital will kill the print, but you're either going to read digital comics or that's going to be your gateway into print. If someone's reading,
for me, it absolutely was.
Yeah, if someone's only reading digital, they're never going to go into a comic book shop anyways. They're just going to be digital people. But I think it leads more people into print. But case in point.
and yeah, it kind of gets. I think it is a very loaded subject, and I think there's a lot. Like realistically, you should buy the stuff that you're reading. Like you shouldn't steal things, right? It was it was a fledgling thing at the time, and it was more like, what can I do with this iPad? And it's like and Comixology didn't exist at that time,
right?
Like there wasn't a digital market. It was people just scanning things. But so if it was now, I probably would have approached it differently because they're all accessible online through legal channels,
right?
But at the same time, it's like reading it digitally. It's like, well, I want a print copy of this, like. The first big book I bought after getting back into comics was Walking Dead #1, and I bought it for like $250.
Ooh, what a steal.
But at the time, my wife's like, "You're gonna spend $250 on a comic book?" I'm like, "Well, I really need to complete this run." Like I found almost all the others in backstock. The TV show hadn't been announced yet. Right. It was like right on the cusp of all that, so all the other stuff was accessible. But #1 was now a collectible, and it's like. I couldn't even fathom at that point, spending that much. We'd had a garage sale. I was a collector in the interim of video games. I'd collected vintage video game systems, and I had all my Magic the Gathering cards. I didn't get rid of anything, so I'd kept everything from the early 90s on up. Ended up selling that collection for almost $20,000, and that really seeded a lot of the money I had for starting my comic book collection.
That's awesome.
Right. But by the way, do you still have your Magic cards and your Yu-Gi-Oh cards? Oh my God, have you seen the prices on those lately?
So I sold the Magic card collection, and that was almost 10 years ago, and that was $20,000. Now it would probably be $80,000. But at the same time, I rolled that $20,000 into so it's all relative.
Yeah. Right. So one thing that we do talk a lot about on the show here, and I see you have a CGC box sitting on the floor over there. Oh, yeah. And Alex and I tend to focus on the CGC aspect of grading because obviously it makes it a commodity, right? I can put it on eBay, I could put it on my website, I could put it in the store, and it's a 9.6, it's a 9.4, it's an 8.0. It takes the thinking out of it in terms of buying and selling, and it makes it very transactional. I know that you collect a lot of raw stuff and you buy a lot of raw stuff. Talk a little bit about the difference between buying raw, buying graded, what your preference is, and then there are a lot of folks like yourself who still go out and buy raw, and then some people convert it to CGC. And remember, a half-point grade, a 1-point grade, a 7 to an 8, a 7.5 to 8.5 on these vintage books can mean thousands of dollars for a book.
I mean, I just happen to have like a good example. Like here, like I bought this. This came into a local store recently. Old label CGC, 8.5. Never been pressed or cleaned.
Never going to be pressed. No, that, by the way, trick for the fans out there in the audience. Old label books have not been pressed.
Right.
That's a key. You find an old label book, you can press it, you can go up. Okay, sorry to interrupt, but that's a tip I wanted to give.
That's it.
that's kind of my point with this. It's like I paid under GPA for this. I spent $2,500 on it. It's an 8.5, old label. I'm gonna have it pressed. I'll have it cleaned. Hopefully, it pulls a 9.0, 9.2. You know, then it's worth 3 times what I paid for it.
Yeah.
You know, like on the other side, I'm trying to complete my Fantastic Four collection. So I just bought this off eBay. It's $3,500. It has some good like pressing and cleaning potential too. This book, after it's graded, is going to be worth $1,500 to $2,000 more. Right. But there's a learning curve to that, and there's a risk to it too. You know, especially buying stuff off of eBay. Like there's a lot of bad books on eBay. There's a lot of stuff that people will list that, unless you really go through them with the fine tooth comb, when you get them, you got to look for things like restoration, missing pages, cutouts. There's a lot of that stuff, especially on the vintage things, that if it's a big book and it hasn't already been graded, it sends up a lot of red flags at this point, because it's rare that, especially somebody who knows what they're dealing with, is going to list something and not have it already graded, because that's where you've locked in your value.
Do you see that with mostly mid to highs and not like lows? Like if it's a 2.5, 3, it's kind of safer than maybe like someone saying it's a 7.0, very, very fine.
Depends on the book. You know, like something like FF5 has just gone up so much in the last couple of years. It just keeps going up. That, I mean, any of these early FF books, even low grade and graded values, it's way over guide. Like guide doesn't, you have to use GPA at this point to see
definitely
where it's trending and kind of figure out where you can jump into. It's an interesting market.
What is the reason for, you know, Alex and I talk about this all the time. Oh, they announce a film, they announce a character, they announce this, they announce that. But yes, you do have these staple characters like the Spider-Man 300, which, you know, is $5,000-$6,000 now, and it was half that price 6 months ago, and it was half the price of that 6 months before that. What is creating that sort of escalation so rapidly over time that really, like, again, FF hasn't had a popular film in many years. Why all of a sudden, like, what is it with these books that is pushing them in that direction?
Well, up until like 5 years, this is my theories behind it. Like up until 5 years ago, you didn't have the same global market you do now. It wasn't as accessible to be buying up these American comic keys internationally. But now I found in the last 5 years, you have a ton of Asian, Middle Eastern, and European buyers with a lot of money who are buying up pedigree books and then lower grade books, and just either buying them because they're collectors, because these are so like now ubiquitous characters within culture across the world. It's created just a global demand for it. And then you have people who are investors who aren't investing in the stock market as much. They're putting money back into hard assets, and it's really driving up. I mean, like Hulk 181, there's 200,000 copies on the market, you know, out there. It is not a rare book, but every collector wants a copy, and then every investor wants a copy. It's just one of those books that you want. They want one copy, they want 5 copies, and so it dries up the market for it. And then a lot of the early Marvels, Silver Age Marvels, like those first 2 years, those print runs are low and the paper is crappy. So every year there's less and less of those on the market, and they keep falling apart, and that just keeps driving up demand. And people like collectors realize like they're not rare, but it's like pulps. They're not a well-established or easy to preserve, you know, collectible, and it's iconic characters that aren't going away. It just becomes more and more, you know.
You know, it's interesting. Alex and I always, you know, we've had shows where we do some Silver Age. We don't really talk too much about Golden Age. We've done silver, we've done bronze, we've done copper, we've done modern. The modern market is just completely on fire, which we think has a lot to do. The Miles Morales has to do with the films and things like that. Sure. Is there a particular area that you're like, oh, I don't really dabble in the moderns. I deal with the coppers. I deal with the gold. Or do you focus in on one area, or do you sort of broaden out and say, you know what, I touch everything simply because I don't want to miss out, or it's just too broad for you?
It depends on which aspect you're talking. Like for my personal collection, there's modern stuff I want to keep, but I really would like to, as a collector, focus on like completing my Silver Age Marvel stuff. Like I'm close on a few things. Like I almost have all of the FFs. I need an FF1. So that's a big, you know, Spider-Man. Right? I've got 2 through 700, but number 1 is a big buy. Amazing Fantasy 15. There has to be some sort of miracle there for me. You know, but so that's the kind of stuff that I'm focusing on. But at the same time, I get easily distracted. I buy stuff basically every day, and it just kind of depends on what comes along, because local stores I have good relationships with, a bunch of online friends, resellers, store owners across the country will say, hey, we got this collection in, are you interested in this? And it could be modern, it could be older, and that's the cool thing about comics. There's interesting stuff in every era, in every way, like signed books, unsigned books, sketchbooks, original art. Like, I never get bored with any of it, and there's always something new to learn. So it's like, if I was really focused, I'd probably have all my Marvel stuff done, because I would only be focusing on that. But it's such an outlet of entertainment and joy for me. I just kind of like to go wherever when it comes to my personal collection, and be as informed about every aspect of the collecting communities when it comes to being able to find stuff to resell, because that's how I fund my collection.
It's tough when you see a comic collection come in and there's a whole set of Lancelot Link covers that you can't say no to. So, I mean,
absolutely. You're preaching to the choir there. I have bought, I think I have all of those.
Yeah. A monkey in a trench coat. How can you go wrong with any of that?
Alex, what are you buying every week, every month? What do you walk in the store? What do you got?
I'm buying modern stuff. I keep up with the Star Wars and mainstream DC stuff and Image stuff. But I mean, I think I've pretty much gotten everything from my want list my last days at Midtown. I got the Doctor Who and the Daleks movie classics. I got a first Jonah Hex. So there's Police Comics #1, I think, because I'm a huge Plastic Man fan. I think that's probably the last big book that might maybe at some point be able to get, because it's expensive, but it's not out of reach, like an Amazing One or something.
Did you get your Jonah Hex signed by Brolin or no?
I did not. No. I left it. That was a raw copy I picked up, and I thought it was going to be an 8.0. It came back 7, but
I don't know if we're gonna see him again. But by the way, Aaron, that brings up another topic in terms of signature series, blue label, yellow label. It's always a hot topic, and I always see it debated on the CGC boards, right? Like, there are some people, like when we had Shameik Moore recently, some people are like, oh my God, why are you getting the voice actor to sign it? And then some people are like, of course I'm going to get the Shameik. He's the only one who's ever depicted Miles Morales. He is Miles Morales. I mean, that movie was so hugely successful. Do you deal with the CGC signature series stuff? Do you do actors? Do you do writers, artists, or you just kind of stay in the blue label / raw lane?
No, I've got a bunch. I don't have it in front of me. I just bought from eBay seller. I think it was Vault or something like that. But he had bold, like, first appearances of Morpho, Ramona Fradon. She's 94.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I'm never going to be able to see her at a show at this point. So it's like he had all 3 of those. I want those for my personal collection. I want her character that she created, signature series, in my personal collection. So it's like, and I've got just stuff like that. And I have some not, like I have a bunch of Dave Stevens signatures that are kind of raw at this point that I wouldn't send in for CGC grading. They'd probably go to CBCS.
Right.
And then there's even stuff, frankly, people will like cringe when they hear this. I give a lot of signatures to PGX that are not necessarily worth sending to CBCS, that are cosplayers, for cosplay photos. Like, these are things that I resell. I mean, I just sold on eBay. I found a whole bunch of John Byrne FF signed in backstock at one of the stores here. Gave them to PGX. They graded them. Cost me $20 per. The guy just bought 3 of them. It was almost $500.
Nice.
And there's a market for some of these things. You just have to weigh the cost of the authentication, grading, etc., time to get it back versus the service. And I think all 3 of the big ones in the market have different areas where they have value.
It's cool on that end when you talk about finding signatures and sending them out. So when my dad was alive, and I didn't even know this because we didn't find this out till we had cleaned out the house. Apparently he had been communicating with the Ultimate Warrior. I guess he wanted to do and he did a signing in our store back in the day. And we found, as we were cleaning everything up at my mom's house, we found an envelope, manila envelope, with 6 signed Ultimate Warrior comic books.
Yeah.
With a personal note from Warrior saying, "Hey Martin, I hear you guys have the best shop, and it's really great." And it's a handwritten note from Warrior too.
That's awesome.
So and Warrior, as popular as he was for many years, people forget that he was only, when it comes to autographs and value, it's a lot of it has to do with, how long were they famous for? How long were they living for? At what point did they sort of drop out or drop off the map? Right. Warrior signed autographs while he was famous in the WWE, but then he vanished for 20 years and he didn't really sign very much. And then he was going to do our show in Minneapolis. Alex, were you working for us at that time?
I don't think so. I don't believe
and he passed away. He passed away a month before our Minneapolis show, and it was going to be his first appearance in like 15 or 20 years. So, every so often, that when you look at people like Heath Ledger and, Joaquin Phoenix, and even most recently Chadwick Boseman, it's how long were they, Kurt Cobain, how long were they famous for? What was that period of time? And, are they sort of memorable where their legacy sort of lives on? Did they make an imprint in whatever field they were in? And that really sort of escalates, the value on some of this stuff. So yes, you're right, Aaron. I wound up sending that stuff to Steve Borak over at CBCS. Yep. He's a good friend. He's a good friend for 20 some odd years, and he was at CGC at the very beginning. He was the first guy I think they had over there.
Yeah, he's one of the founders, and it's not only that. Like, there's a lot of unverified signatures, as long as you can find the provenance behind them, or like they feel like somewhat like you find them in back stock and there's sort of like that good feeling like this is probably authentic. Like when it comes to those Warrior comics, I found a couple of those digging through at Rose City Comic Con. Guy had just boxes of bulk, like they were $1 a piece. I was going through, and then I found a couple of those Warrior ash cans signed. And it's the same thing. And those went to CBCS for verification, because that's a valuable signature. Like you were saying, pretty small window where he's actually signing stuff. The
Correct.
People who have them tend to keep them too. Like
it was a very, one of the people that people ask me about all the time, can you get Mr. T? Can you get Mr. T? Well, Mr. T did the Philadelphia, I can't remember what it was called back then, the Philadelphia comic something or other. Back in 1993, he had a comic book coming out. My brother has a picture with him. I found a picture of my dad with Mr. T, and I found a Mr. T signed comic. And those are impossible. Mr. T has, he kind of sort of signed some autographs during those 18 years. But remember, that was 35 years ago.
Totally, right.
You forget it was 1983, 1984, 1985. It's 33, 35, 37 years ago. He signed for a small window, decided he didn't want to sign anymore. Good luck getting a Mr. T autograph. And by the way, it's only 3 letters. It's Mr. So if you don't have provenance, it's almost impossible to verify those signatures. Same thing with Warrior, by the way, because at the beginning of his career, he signed Ultimate Warrior. After he left the WWE, he just signed Warrior. The books that we have are just signed Warrior. But obviously with the letter and the provenance and the handwriting, you can clearly match all the handwriting, all the letter, everything. But yes, you're right. So by the way, what'd you wind up doing with those Warrior books?
I have one, and I sold the other. Another eBay
good.
one, and sold for $700 or something like
that. Yeah, wrestling fans are big. They're big fans.
If not only just wrestling fans, there's also the comics crossover on that too. So like when it comes to like celebrity stuff, like even like Chadwick Boseman, it's like there's always going to be Black Panther fans, and there's going to be then fans of him as well. But there's that kind of now perpetual crossover that like the Marvel Cinematic Universe isn't going away.
Right.
And the rarity of those kind of signatures has, I think, long-term value, whereas other stuff might be like shorter in the zeitgeist, like people are for a particular, celebrity, that sort of thing, but they might not be around 20 years from now. People might not care unless it's really tied to some other property.
Mm-hmm.
Makes a big difference.
Yeah, you talked earlier about some of your holy grails. You're looking for Spider-Man 1. You're looking for FF1. Is there a book that has eluded you in the sense, and we see this all the time in comics and cards and everything, where it's not just tracking, it's not just, okay, in FF1, you could buy them, they're for sale, and whatever. Is there a book that sort of is your holy grail, but you haven't been able to find one? It's just a small print run. It's a tough to find book. It's a Ninja Turtles 1 first print. It's a it's a Bone 1 first print. Something like that. Is there something that sort of? Oh, you do. Okay. So is there something that sort of? Is there something that sort of eluded you over the years, or? Those are kind of investment books at this point, right? Like I almost got all the different Turtles. I just don't have a Turtles first print, and at this point, it's now such a mega, grail. Whereas like same with Bone 1,
that you mentioned. It's like I happened to find that at a local comic show. Guy had it, and it wasn't cheap, but it was a quarter of what anything on eBay would have been. And it was like actually there in my hand. There was provenance for it, and it has a kind of full story behind it. But it's hard to say when it comes to the Grail books, other than like a signature on something like a ROM #1 to have Bill Manilow sign it. But it would have to be something from the 80s. There's such a small window where that book could have been signed, and I've never seen one. I've seen some sold listings, but those signatures seem very fishy too. So to find something that actually had a good story behind it, that you could say was authentic, as a big fan of ROM, that would be a Grail book to have. Not necessarily worth a ton. It's just, I can't find it. Like, I don't know anyone with it. I've never really seen one that's I would feel is authentic.
Would that be something that you think it would be like a ballpoint pen inside the front cover type signature?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. It definitely wouldn't be like a Sharpie on the front, front cover or something like that.
That's one of those ones where you're like, if you see it for sale for Sharpie, you're like, wait a second. That might not be true.
And there was a learning curve when it came to like those unverified signatures. Like I got taken early on by like Steve Ditko signatures that were in Sharpie on the cover of that. And it's like, you learn pretty quickly, Steve Ditko didn't sign comics.
It has to be
comics
like
he signed
legal
were,
work or something. Yeah.
he did sign comics, but they were like, when he was forced to go to like comic shows in like the 70s, 60s and 70s, and they're always on the inside. There usually is a story behind that, and it's still a very small one of those comics. Like he was very it's famous with Ditko that you send him a comic in the mail for signature, he'll send you a letter back saying he doesn't sign comics signed.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Saying
that you get the letter, but
so you get a letter saying, I don't do signatures. Oh, there's tons of letters. It's great to look up Steve Ditko letters because people wrote him for decades, and he almost seemed like he was compelled to write everyone who wrote him back.
Telling them that he didn't want to sign stuff and he didn't care about Spider-Man.
Right. He didn't want to sign stuff. He didn't have time to read the comic that they sent them, or expounding his, Randian individualism. But they're fascinating. It's really like he's an interesting creator in that way that he's very adherent.
Alex, we got to find a picture of one of those and show it.
There was a time where some of us got out of Midtown, like on a Thursday night or Wednesday night, and we all went out to the bar, and we'd get drunk enough to be like, all right, let's just go to Steve Ditko's. We'll go to his office. We'll wait in the morning. Maybe we'll come walk by. Maybe because he had the Midtown office up until he passed. I mean, he was still going to his Midtown office every day until his passing.
I think he might have passed away in his office.
Yeah.
So Alex, you were basically a stalker at that point.
We never did it. We all. Someone always had to go to sleep, or someone's girlfriend was waiting for him. But I mean, very close a couple times.
So Alex, what book are you chasing?
I think Police Comics won. I mean, it's definitely one of those things where I want it. I know I can get an affordable copy at some point. Hopefully, they don't make a Plastic Man movie anytime soon, so it gets out of my hands. But I think a Police Comics. Everything else I've got what I need.
It's funny that you mentioned Plastic Man. When I think of all the characters that I watched on TV as a kid, Wonder Twins, Iceman. We talked about Iceman on the cartoons. Plastic Man. Those characters didn't really go anywhere. I don't know why they had me when I was a kid. I would have easily graduated to a Plastic Man or a Wonder Twins movie, or like Zan and Jaina. Like
DC, like the DC Silver Age or like Super Friends type characters, I think are harder to translate into like mainstream movies. They work well as cartoons, right? But it's like Plastic Man would be really interesting to see somebody do something more modernized and not either make it too like dark and gritty, like keep the fun of that kind of character, but do it in a compelling new way. Like that's why like the Shazam movie, like that was a hard thing to pull off, and I think they did it. And that's one of the few.
I like the Shazam movie, and I thought Zach did a great job.
Right. Yeah. That's the shining DC example, I think, of a good translation.
Got it. Yeah. So for me, my favorite character in the entire Marvel universe is Loki, and I'll tell you why. I think when you look at all the great films and you look at the great stories, it's only as good as the villain, right? Batman is only as good as Joker is bad. If you don't have a good Joker, you don't have a good Batman story, right? When you look at Bane and you look at Tom Hardy and you look at some of these films, when you look at some of these films, I think the villains make the films, whether it was Ultron in Age of Ultron, whether it was Thanos in the Avengers films. You need the heroes to play off of somebody. And there's something
you
about
have
the
to have
Loki.
without Lex Luthor, Superman isn't compelling, right?
Correct. Correct. And I just think that Loki, because of the dynamic with Thor and because of the villainous of it all, it's the most interesting character in the universe. And it's a very just the psychiatric, whatever you want to call it, the psychological factors of Loki are just, you have the brother versus the brother, then you have they're teaming up against it's all those compelling elements that make it very important. So for me, it would be a journey.
It's a timeless story at this point.
Correct.
Because it's like Kirby was taking that all. It's Norse mythology. It's the trickster gods. Thor being the powerful god, but not necessarily having the wisdom, right? It's like, whereas Odin has lived throughout the eternity, and now he's like the older version of what happens. You have to learn, and you have to have that betrayal, and you have to have the trickster in order to grow yourself, as a person.
Great. Well, our time is up here, Aaron. We appreciate you coming on today. Is there any sort of parting words that you sort of,
you want to plug a website?
Website, parting words, anything else? Your Twitter, anything else you want to talk about before you?
My Twitter is definitely probably the easiest place to find at least the landing page for me, since just twitter.com/Aaron Meyers, AARONMEYERS. As far as parting wisdom, it kind of goes back to the beginning. I think collect what you like, find out what you love, pursue that, and everything else kind of starts to grow from there.
Great. All right. Thank you, Aaron, for your time today. We really appreciate it. And we'll be talking to you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, sir.
All right. And now we're at that time of the show. Alex, you ready?
I'm ready.
Very fancy schmancy here. It's Alex's pick of the week. Alex, what do you got for us this week?
Yeah, just a quick, easy one. We've talked about records, and I'm probably going to talk about records more, but I just bought something that was an amazing find for me as a Star Wars fan and a record guy. So I got this record called Star Wars from the company Kid Stuff. It's got the Star Wars logo. The picture is going to come up. Don't worry, everybody. I'll show a picture here. If not, go to the YouTube. If you're listening to it, go to YouTube. You'll see it. But it's the Star Wars logo. It's a picture of kids in a spaceship flying away. The little silver robot and a little gold robot. So, this record's going to be about Star Wars. Maybe it's just told a different way. It has nothing to do with Star Wars. The record opens up and it's a weird 70s funky Star Wars theme. And you're like, it's a Star Wars theme. It's a little different. And then it's Jack and the Beanstalk in space. That's it.
How do they not get sued by Lucasfilm?
I mean, you're probably talking 1980 when this thing
okay.
came out.
It's really,
so it's like, yes, the Star Wars is trademarked, but none of the characters were on it, and I don't know. But if you can find a copy, it was like $7. It's nothing, but it's hilarious. It has nothing to do with Star Wars. It has the theme. It looks like it on the front, but just to sell records.
Sounds like you got duped, Alex.
No, I knew what I was going into. I knew it was going to be something fun.
Okay. All right. Good. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, everybody, today. We will see you next week. Same bat time.
Same bat channel.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.